Andrew Little.
Thank you. A pleasure to take a call on the legislation bill, Sir, and to acknowledge the last speaker, Catherine Delahunty, and just to say that there is a tension between as simpler language as possible being used in legislation and, of course, the other, which is precision. And there has been a trade-off made over some years now between the length of legislation to ensure that as simple language as possible is used, but also sometimes at the risk of imprecision. And one only has to look at the number of amending bills that come back to fix up what were well-intended drafting initiatives, but that have to be clarified subsequently, and indeed the comments of the judges and the profession themselves, who have to make sense of our attempts at trying to make the legislation more accessible. But there's no question that the objective of trying to make legislation more accessible and streamlining the process for it in terms of publication and correction is welcome, and some might say overdue. So to the extent that this bill means that the periodic review of legislation means that those clerical errors that are identified and can be fixed up without changing the substance or the meaning or the intention of the bill can be done, then that is good. But also the publication of legislation, because Catherine Delahunty is absolutely correct, is that there is no point in claiming as a principle of law in the court that ignorance of the law is no excuse on the one hand, but actually making law inaccessible at the very least through the means of publication on the other. There is a conflict between those two objectives. So the fact that this bill promotes and encourages greater accessibility through online and electronic means is a most welcome development. I relayed in an earlier speech on this bill the experience I had recently of a senior member of the bar, a QC in fact, who had come along to a court hearing armed with large voluminous texts carrying a great weight on this rather frail frame of a person, and how easy it would have been had he had understood and managed electronic access to the legislation, that he would have made his day, I'm sure, a lot easier. And because we are generous on this side of the House, and no matter who a QC represents, whether it's defendants or
$14,000 a day QCs.
$14,000 a day QCs, even they, some of them struggle with electronic access to legislation, and this would make it a lot easier. And even when we're dealing with legislation that's somewhat brief, that only runs to a few pages. And let me randomly select an example. The Defamation Act, for example.
A very good lawyer. A very successful lawyer.
The Defamation Act, for example, is a reasonably brief piece of legislation, but it's amazing how many lawyers struggle to court with it, and a huge... our faces are well saved, Mr Hanade. My recent experiences of engagements with QCs have left me feeling lighter for the experience, and happier and most contented with my contributions politically over the last 12 months. And I'm appreciative of the support I've had from all sectors of the House, not only my colleagues on this side, but one or two on the other side as well. And it all goes to illustrate, Sir, that legislation, if it is to be made sense of in a modern democratic state, as indeed we are, needs to be accessible through all means. And so this bill is well-intentioned, well-drafted, and for that reason we support it without exception.
Dr. Shiai.